Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Linda.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe. I'm here with Melinda and Vernon. We're going to go over the Paycheck Protection Program and how to get loan forgiveness for your small business. I'm going to start off. We're going to give you a quick overview of the PPP loan, some sample statistics that we've collected and that we've got from other sources. We're going to talk about the eligibility for loan forgiveness, how to track your spending, the time period that you have, whether or not these expenses are going to be deductible in next year when you're doing your taxes, the steps to take for forgiveness, some tips and tricks, and then we're going to go over some of the questions that you guys have submitted.
So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second webinar. I realize you're all very busy trying to keep your small businesses alive and thriving, but I think some of this, we've just been inundated with so many questions and concerns that we thought most small businesses would benefit from some of this information. So welcome everyone. So as you know, the Paycheck Protection Program loans were given out in sort of two phases. And you know, who knows what will end up happening. We could potentially see more money down the road. Hello. So the whole purpose of the PPP loan was payroll protection. And so we want to keep people off of unemployment. I can't stress that enough. So the amounts that were calculated for the PPP should have been specific to your payroll, your official W-2 employees. Early on in this process, there was a lot of confusion whether independent contractors could be used, what expenses were included. And so if you received PPP money very early on, you may want to go back and revisit that calculation because guidance did come out that was final and very clear. The qualified expenses that were produced for your PPP are entitled to be forgiven. We realize many of you are open, some of you are partially open, and some of you are not opened at all. To date, we understand that it does not matter. Whether you're earning money or you're not, you are entitled to the PPP funds. So some quick statistics that we thought would be helpful. These are the first part of the slide here goes over our clients specifically that were approved and some of the lenders that our clients utilized and were successful with. And the second part of the slide is you know, our client average. So then the Massachusetts average for people who've collected on the PPP loans, the national average for round 1 and the national average for round 2. This would include to date any businesses who received PPP funds and returned it. As many of you may know, there were the likes of the Shake Shack and the Cheesecake Factory and Harvard and some others that gave the funds back after they realized they weren't really qualified for the loan. So eligibility for forgiveness. There's been a lot of discussion over this, and I don't think it's over. So there will be probably some updates as we go along and get further along, you know, into this process. But basically, the intent, again, I can't stress enough for the PPP was to keep people off of unemployment. So with that said, 75% of your loan should go towards payroll. 25% can go towards rent, utilities, and any mortgages held by the business-owned property. Payroll expenses include the wages, that's your gross wages, not to exceed $100,000 for any one employee. State employer taxes, what these include is state unemployment, Massachusetts health insurance tax, the PFML, the FMLA, Paychecks. If you have your payroll through Paychecks, they've done a really great job with providing a report to tell you what those taxes are that you can include in your PPP. Any employer retirement plan contribution, including profit sharing plans, and then your health care, any cost associated with the employer portion of health care. Unforgiven amounts. You know, we all hope that all of the money that we received will be forgiven. In the event it's not, the interest rate is 1%. It's a 2-year loan, and the first 6 months are deferred. So that doesn't add 6 months on to the end of the 2 years. So for all intents and purposes, if you defer for 6 months, you're going to have 18 months to pay off the loan. So how do we track our expenses? There's 2 schools of thought. Now, bear in mind, I'm an accountant with an auditing background, so I tend to be of the more conservative side, and that would be to maintain a separate account. It makes tracking easy. Everything you've spent is in that one place, including the money, the proceeds from the loan. And then in the chance that there is an audit, you're going to limit their access to that one particular account. Now, I don't want anybody to get all upset and say, oh my goodness, I should have done that, I didn't do it. If you didn't do it, it's not the end of the world. If you want to, you know, consider doing it now, that's okay. But if you didn't do it, don't let that distract you from doing what you need to do during this process. So what I would say is maintain very good records. I say to my clients, every time you write out a check that's applicable for the loan, you're going to take a copy of the check, you're going to take a copy of the invoice, and you're going to put it in a file. And I would do that in real time. I wouldn't wait until the 8-week period was over to go back and do this. You're going to have enough on your plates with trying to keep your businesses alive and you know, getting some revenue in the door. Quarterly reports may not be out for payroll by the time your 8-week period is up. So you're going to want to maintain really good payroll reports to substantiate the payroll that you've expended during this 8-week period. Again, Paychex is doing a really great job with providing reports and information to help our jobs a lot easier with getting the appropriate information for this. So if you're not using Paychex and you're using somebody else, and by no means is this a plug for Paychex, I'm just super impressed with how they've handled this. Reach out to your payroll provider and see how they can help with getting you the information you need quickly and timely. So timing, we do have 8 weeks from the day that money was deposited into your bank account. So be really pay close attention to that date, because they're holding a very strict timeline to this. If you haven't received your money yet and you've applied, the SBA has come out and has told any bank or other financial institution that is administering these loans that once the SBA has approved the loan, which by the way is happening in a matter of hours, once that bank submits your loan, the bank has 10 days to fund and close that loan. And if they don't, there's penalties. So we're seeing this process moving very, very quickly now. You cannot use this money to pay for past expenses. I realize many of you have worked really, really hard and have sacrificed a tremendous amount to keep your employees on payroll. Unfortunately, this money cannot be used for the past. It's for the time you get the money, 8 weeks going forward. There's been a lot of discussion out there and a lot of news attention around people who received too much money, shouldn't have received the money at all. And the SBA has come out and said, look, give it back, and you have until May 14th to do so, and there'll be no questions asked whatsoever. We all can sort of interpret what is coming out of that phrase, and that the SBA as well as the feds understand that there are companies out there that receive this money that shouldn't have. I want to say, if you're earning money and you consistently earned money during this pandemic, it doesn't matter. It's not about your revenue. It's about your costs and your payroll specifically. So don't feel, well, I earned money and I got this payroll protection, so maybe I should return it. No, not necessarily. If you have any questions, about that, we can speak one-on-one. After the 8-week period, you have 60 days to apply for forgiveness from the lender. And then the lender has 60 days to give you a letter of forgiveness. So again, if we all remember when this first money came out, and the banks and all of us, we really didn't know what was going on. And it was taking a tremendous amount of time, and rules were being developed and interpreted by the minute, if not by the hour, and a lot went wrong. So I want to say that this 8-week period is going to be very, very critical, which is why I say, if you're keeping track of all of this money as you're spending it, when it's gone, you literally should have a manila envelope or a folder on your desktop with all of the supporting documentation. And I would plan on submitting that day to the bank. Okay, deductibility. There's been some talk about this recently, and this week we learned that the IRS came out with a bulletin and said any expenses that you incurred in used funds for the PPP will not be deductible. And I always say, and some of my clients question, that the IRS code really was developed with a common sense approach. And we all can appreciate there's no double dipping, right? So if the government has paid you by way of a PPP loan for some of your expenses, you can't then go and get a deduction for those expenses, right? But I have to tell you, there are senators working very hard to combat that. And they're saying that the original intent of the PPP was not by way of eliminating these as deductions. So there's Congress, out there saying that they want you to be able to deduct those expenses as well. Stay tuned, jury's still out. I, for one, think that won't happen, but that's just my personal opinion. But we'll see how things progress here. Steps for forgiveness. Your lender decides forgiveness, just like your lender decided to give you the loan and how much you were going to get for the loan. Even though there was very specific guidance, many lenders did not follow that guidance. So especially early on, if you have a PPP loan, you got loan documents, it is an official loan. Read the agreement. From what I understand, there's not a lot of talk in these agreements about what is forgiven. And I've been reaching out to banks over the last few weeks asking about forgiveness, and I'm really not getting much information. So again, as soon as we have more information, we will be sure to spread the word. Again, once your 8 weeks is up, I would start the process for the application for forgiveness. Can't stress enough, don't wait until the end. Keep a running tab. And don't be afraid to overspend. And when I say overspend, don't be afraid to overspend by way of employees. And we'll go through that in a bit with some questions. The banks are busy, and they're going to continue to be busy. And when this forgiveness hits, they're going to be straight out. So, you know, if you're early and they have, the clock is ticking on 60 days, then chances are this will be behind you very quickly. If you wait, this may be a process that will just never end. So tips and tricks. We talked about no one can be paid more than $100,000 with PPP funds. So that turns out to be about $38.46 for a 2-week period on a biweekly payroll. Anything you pay anybody over this amount will not be forgiven. What we're encouraging our clients to do is make sure that your pay periods, as many as you can, fall within the 8-week window. So for example, if you received your funds on May 4th, this past Monday, and you ran payroll on April 5th, some people thought, wow, great, that payroll can be included because I paid it on April 5th. It's not included if it's for the previous time period. So what happens on the end of the 8 weeks, right? The jury, again, is still out. There's still some discussion over this. But if your 8 weeks ends on June 30th, let's say, and you ran a payroll on July 1st, well, that payroll, chances are, it was for the previous pay period, which is inclusive of your 8-week time frame. One would think that that should be able to be included in the 8-week pay period, right? There are some people out there that saying it is, and some people that are saying it isn't. So what I say is call up your payroll company and make sure that your last payroll falls within that 8-week period. Okay, so there's also a lot of discussion on other costs and how to calculate those. And again, one of our clients called and said, look, I'm making a profit sharing contribution in June, and it's $100,000. That falls within my 8-week period. I get to include retirement contributions. I'm going to include that $100,000. No, it doesn't work that way. So you're going to take your $100,000 retirement contribution. You're going to divide it by 52 weeks, because technically that contribution was for a whole year. And then you're going to multiply that number by 8 weeks. That's the forgivable amount. Okay, this works with bonuses. This works with health insurance. This works with any other type of expense that you used to calculate your PPP loan. Now, when we calculated our PPP loan, we included annual amounts, and then we divided that by 12 and multiplied it by 2.5, right? So when you think about forgiveness, you have to use the same mathematical concept, okay? What was your covered expense during that 8-week period? It's nearly impossible to have this loan completely forgiven without a full staff. Now, originally, there was a lot of discussion about this. It was unclear. We really didn't understand what was happening. You know, for many of us, you know, our businesses were closed and our revenue dried up within 24 hours. So there wasn't a lot we were really thinking about except how am I going to survive this? So with that, you want to be sure that prior to February 15th, if you had 10 employees, then once you receive this PPP money, they are expecting you to have 10 employees. Again, this process is meant to keep people off of unemployment. There's this notion out there about full-time equivalent, FTE. And a full-time equivalent is being determined based on a 30-hour work week. So if you have 10 full part-time employees, and some of them work 10 hours, some of them work 30 hours, some of them work 20 hours, you can add up all of their hours, divide by 30, and come up with a full-time equivalent. Okay? So if before this you had 10 employees, and after this you have 8 employees, you can fill that gap with other part-time employees to come up with a full-time equivalent of 2 more employees. Okay? That again, that can be a little tricky, but if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. Again, there's been a lot of talk about this money, who got it, who should have got it, how much they received, whether they received more than they should have, everything. It's amazing to me, some of the questions that we've received or our colleagues have received regarding this information. So I say, this is taxpayer money that we all received. It's not free money, it's our money. And if the SBA wants to produce a list of every business in the country of who received that money and how much, they can do that. And it can be public knowledge. So when you're making these decisions, think about that information being public, or that information being printed in a newspaper, or any information for that matter being printing in a newspaper, and you don't want your mom to see it, right? So, be really reasonable and considerate of what's happening around the world, and whether or not, there's something you can do to pivot, do something differently, and leave money on the table for another business to potentially get funding.
Linda, I'm just going to add, a great way for you guys to remember what 60 days is from the date that you got it. Talk to Alexa, talk to Siri, talk to Google Home, whatever you have, whatever virtual assistant, they will remind you in 60 days. They'll tell you what day that is. Make it annoying. Make it so that every 5 minutes you're hearing, remember to do your PPP loan, because then you're going to be more likely to get to the bank, get that money, get all those documents in, and get that money forgiven.
Great point, Joe. Thank you. Okay, so thank you all. You all did a great job with getting us a lot of questions, because we did want to be sure that this was helpful to you all and that we were answering the questions that were important to you. So we came up with 5 questions that were commonly asked that we're going to go through, but then we're going to open it up, to get some more questions answered that aren't on this list. So if you didn't get your loan from your bank or from a Massachusetts chartered bank, and you got it from Cabbage or Intuit or Square or some other bank, it doesn't matter. They all have to follow the same rules. So I know we've talked about employees and the PPP and what that means. Very early on in this process, we all believe that independent contractors that we've hired in our business were going to be able to be included in our PPP loan. And a rule came out and said no. So many of you received your PPP loan with independent contractors in that amount. I would encourage you to quickly recalculate your PPP loan on the latest revision of the PPP loan application. And if you receive too much money, then I recommend you return the money to the bank. So independent contractors should not be included in your PPP number. The independent contractors have the ability to go to their bank and get a PPP loan on their own. Can my business still make money if I take the PPP funds? Yes, and we hope you are making money, and we hope you continue to make money. The purpose of this is to help with some of our fixed expenses and, you know, keep America working. What happens if the employee left right before this? It's okay, many employees did. The purpose though is once you receive your PPP funding is that you're encouraging those employees to come back. Now what we realized is many of our employees are making more money on unemployment than they were working for us. So the motivation to come back to work is very low. The government understands that. It's a real dilemma. But yes, the government does expect you to bring your employees back, even if they have nothing to do. Now, this is, again, a very controversial issue. And there is some talk in Washington right now that to allow for people, businesses who are shut down and unable to work at full capacity or even half capacity to postpone using their PP money until they are at some percentage of capacity, whether that's going to be 50% or 80%. But it does seem unfair to businesses that have been consistently paying their employees to get this money, understand I can't use it to pay back employee wages, and I have to pay people for not working, right? It really does not make sense. So stay tuned, but as of right now, yes, that is the intent. Bring your employees back so that your full-time equivalents are at the same number as before this date, and they're using a February 15th date to discuss this.
We have a few questions already coming in.
Okay, so Joe will help me go through some of these questions. Are the federal payroll taxes included? No, they are not.
Those are paid mainly by the employee. You know, FICA taxes are different, but the employee withholding is that's gonna be the bulk of that tax, and those are actually employee taxes.
Can we increase pay on certain employees to be forgiven? It's a great question. Again, there is some controversy over this, and we've received a lot of questions from people saying, you know, can I give my employees bonuses? Can I pay them more? Can I put my family on the payroll? You know, all of these things, because number one, businesses need help. And number two, they have expenses that are pretty significant. And so I understand the fear, and I understand that you're really searching for ways to be able to use this money so that you can keep your business alive. I would discourage you from doing anything that you don't plan to continue once the PPP funds are exhausted. For example, if you give someone an increase, that increase needs to stay. So we're going to use the reasonableness here is be reasonable. Do what makes sense for your business. Don't make decisions based on, I have to spend this money so it can be forgiven. One of the things was, you know, one of my clients historically pays bonuses the first quarter. And he said, I didn't pay them because I was nervous and I wasn't sure what I should do. Can I pay them once I get my PPP money? Yes, you can. But what's the forgivable amount? The forgivable amount is if that bonus was based on their previous year's performance, then that bonus needs to be calculated for an 8-week period. And how you would do that, you take the bonus, whatever the amount is, you divide by 52 weeks, and you'd multiply it by 8. That is the forgivable amount of the bonus paid. So there's nothing in the legislative guidelines or the CARES Act that says you cannot pay someone this. But there are guidelines on the mathematical equation of the forgivable amount. Okay? At the end of the day, 1% is probably the lowest interest rate on a loan than any of us have heard in a very, very long time and may not ever hear of again. So if the loan is not forgivable, but it gives you enough liquidity to get through this hump, then that's okay. Don't stress out about the forgiveness. We all want it to be forgiven, I understand that, but I wouldn't let it keep you up at night. Okay, I paid April rent 7 days after my PPP dropped. Is this forgiven? Well, what you would do is if you got your loan in April and you're paying April rent, then the time frame from when you got your loan to the end of the month, for the month of April, let's say, that part is going to be forgiven. So if you paid your rent on April 7th, the first, and you got your PPP on April 8th, the first 7 days are not forgiven. Okay? But the rest of the 23 days would be forgiven.
The employees will collect.
Okay, if you have employees on unemployment, you have to encourage them to come off of unemployment and come back to work. Of course, we live in America, we can't make anybody do anything, but that is, again, the intent of this. So again, we want to, alert our employees that your job is here, you're going to be paid, come back to work.
One thing for that too, as soon as you call them back, there may be they might have to reapply for unemployment under a different claim now that there is work available for them. So instead of, they'll now have to file as being afraid to come back to work, which another step might drag out a few weeks.
So that's a good point. Let's follow up with that. So let's say you have a full-time employee that's that's collecting unemployment, and you can bring them back at 25 hours a week. That employee can still collect unemployment. They just have to report the wages that you're paying to them. And those 25 hours that you're paying them goes into the full-time equivalent calculation. So again, you know how to best run your business and what you need to survive. And if that means bringing back employees at a reduced hours or reduced work, then that's what you should be doing. Okay, we are school that will remain closed and I have to pay my, okay. So in the case of a school, a lot of schools sort of take the salary for a 9-month school year, if you will, and pay them over 12 months. If you're doing that, then the PPP funds can potentially get forgiven. But this is a tricky calculation. So if any of you have specific questions, you probably want to give the office a call and let us work through that. If in fact you can bring back the employees to do other things or to, reassign their duties or things like that, you're also encouraged to do that. So even though your business may be closed, there is some talk that you can bring your employees into the office safely, maintaining the CDC guidelines and doing things to help you prepare for your opening.
Will they be penalized if they can't get their employees to come back? They hang on to the entire amount as a loan?
Well, potentially, yes, because the loan will not be forgiven. So, but again, I wouldn't stress about that. I think, I think if that happens and you're doing the best for your business, then you're going to have a 1% loan, and that's really not the end of the day. Great question. Yes, you can hire more employees. So if previous to this you had 4 employees and now you want to hire 5 or 6, absolutely. That is what this is intended to do, is to get people to work. The payroll paid the day after the funds were received is not forgivable. Funds are only forgiven if they are earned during the 8 weeks and paid during the 8 weeks. Yes, that is correct. Now, again, there's controversy in that the end of this 8-week period, if our payroll schedule falls out of the 8-week period, but includes time that fell within the 8-week period, I believe there's going to be a very good chance that that money will be forgiven, but there isn't a definitive answer as of now. The residual amount left over at the end of an 8-week period, would that be the loan for the 2-year period? Correct. And the difference is forgiven? Yes. Yes. So if you received a $100,000 loan and 85,000 of it was forgiven, then you have a $15,000 loan at 1% for 2 years. Okay, so unemployment, people are out there trying to determine, how this is going to work, and how am I going to be able to pay my bills, feed my family, and whatnot. The calculation for unemployment is as follows. You take the last 4 quarters of the employee's earnings. Of those 4 quarters, you pull out the 2 highest earning quarters. You add those 2 together, you divide by 26, and you multiply by 50%. All right, that's a lot. If you need that, we will repeat that and send that out to everybody. That is how much you're going to collect on unemployment, to a max, I think, of $813 a week. It could be for Massachusetts. Then the feds are giving everyone who gets a Massachusetts unemployment check an extra $600 per week until July 25th. So, how unemployment will allocate based on part-time and amount of money you're earning is going to be tricky, but we are told by the unemployment office that you can still collect unemployment if you go back to work and you're earning less than you were before. Okay, I have said to employees, can you scroll up a little bit, Jim? I have said to employees not wanting to return that they would be reported to unemployment for refusing to work. They say if an employee refuses to work because he's making more money, it is fraud, and they will email them. And to email them. Okay, so unemployment is a tricky thing, and unemployment does not want to be the watchdog. So I can honestly tell you that although it's probably immoral and unethical for someone to continue to collect unemployment when they have the ability to go back to work, it's hard for unemployment to make those decisions. And there could be extenuating circumstances. They could have young children at home. There's no school, there's no daycare. You know, what are they supposed to do? I would not focus your attention on employees who are on unemployment that won't come back. What I can tell you is there are a lot of people out there on unemployment who want to work. So you may be able to find really great, new, qualified employees as a result of this. So don't focus your intention on bringing back employees that don't want to work, and that may not be the best for your business. And I wouldn't rely on challenging unemployment as to whether or not these people should continue to collect unemployment. We're in a pandemic, and the rules are being made up each day and being interpreted each day. And nobody wants to be the one that's responsible for someone not being able to pay their rent, keep their lights on, or feeding their family. If you use 95% of the loan, is 95% of the loan forgiven and 5% converted to a loan? It depends on how you use the loan. So remember, when we received the loan, we were told 75% had to be used for payroll and 25% could be used for rent, utilities, utilities, and mortgages held by a business. So if you were able to spend, you got a loan for $100,000 and you were able to spend $75,000, then you need to do the math of the 75-25 ratio on that $75,000 that you received. And the 75% of that loan must be used for payroll. And if it wasn't, then there's going to be an unforgivable amount in that as well. Does interest start accruing on unforgiven amounts at the end of 8 weeks? Yes. Scroll up, Joe. Okay. All right. I think we've got everybody. Thank you all. If there are any other questions and we haven't, oh, here's one. If we offer dental insurance is $250 a month, the total bill is $3,000. Can we pay the $3,000? You can pay the $3,000. The question is, will that $3,000 be forgivable? And the answer is this. You take the $250 a month times 2, basically 8 weeks, and you will get $500 of that $3,000 forgiven. Now, here's the other thing I'm going to point out about mortgages, because we've had a lot of questions about this as well. The mortgage is not your mortgage at home. The mortgage is if your business owns a building or a property and you have a mortgage on that building, then that mortgage can be included. Many of our clients have businesses and they own the building individually, and the business pays you rent. The mortgage is your personal mortgage, not the mortgage of the business. Now, the rent is an allowable expense. And here's what I say. Do not decide to pay yourself an unreasonable amount of rent because you have to spend the money. I would take a look back of how much rent you spent over the last 12 months, divide that by 52, and multiply by 8. If you use this theory on any money you spend, it will be forgiven. Okay, if the 8 weeks ends mid-month, should we write a check out to our landlord for that portion of the month's rent in order for it to be included? I would, yes, great question. If I had to pay, if my loan 8-week period ended on the 15th, then on the 14th, I would be writing my landlord a check for half a month. Until the guidance comes out and it's clearer that if we have payments made after our 8-week period, but were for the previous 8 weeks, and that can be forgiven, then fine. And we could get that guidance sooner than later. And if we do, we'll be sure to let everybody know. But currently, there is no rule in place to account for that. Okay, if the business is run out of your home and we have one office inside our home for the business, this is a tricky one, okay? Because depending on what type of organization you are, you may have potentially supposed to be paying yourself rent for the use of that home office in your home. So this is tricky. If this applies to any of you, I would encourage you to give us a call and let's chat about it, because that could get tricky. What we are seeing and what's coming down to those of us who are essential businesses that have been helping with the PPP and helping small businesses, the message to us is loud and clear. Please, please, please ensure that your clients understand the necessity to use these funds appropriately. The government has come out and said that anyone who receives a loan of in excess of $2 million will be audited. You can also expect that there will be other audits, just like there's audits for IRS and Mass Department of Revenue all the time. So I would encourage you all to be diligent and use the funds appropriately. And if there's questions, check in with someone of authority that can give you a good answer. Do not Google. There's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of interpretation out there. If you could reach your banker and ask the banker the question and get that answer from your banker, well, then you can use that, right? Because that banker is going to be the one determining your forgiveness. Otherwise, I would be pretty reluctant to rely on any information provided by anyone else. We are recording this. We will make it available. I'm not quite sure how yet, but it will be made available. And until we're planning on continuing to have these every week on Thursdays at 3:30. It could be a very quick session, but if we have any updates or new information, we want to be able to be helpful and get it to you firsthand so that you can focus on running your businesses. So again, thank you all for coming or joining our Zoom call here. We wish you all the best, and we hope you're all successful and prosperous as this pandemic starts to leave us, thankfully. Thank you all. Bye-bye.